Animation starts with a captivating scene of Inspector Sun, a spider detective in Shanghai, embarking on a thrilling mission. He sets out to catch a fugitive cockroach named Red, who's hiding in the Shanghai pier. On his way, he encounters a friendly cricket who helps him with directions, and even rides a seagull to reach his destination. Once there, he teams up with other police officers, including a fellow spider named Jenny. But, instead of taking the conventional route, Sun devises a unique plan to catch Red on his own. He successfully captures Red but accidentally sets a fireworks factory ablaze in the process, which leads to his dismissal from the police force. Despite this setback, Sun remains determined and heads to New York for a much-needed break. But, his plans take an unexpected turn when he meets Jenny again, who's eager to join him on his adventures. Though Sun initially declines her offer, he ends up missing his flight, and Jenny mysteriously appears in his hotel room. Sun went to the restaurant on the plane and found the insect passengers having dinner. There he met Dr. Bugsy, a famous scientist, with his new wife, Arabella. Dr. Bugsy offered Sun a job to protect him and his wife, but Sun declined. Later, Sun witnessed Dr. Bugsy and Arabella having a fight, and Scrabbit told him they caught the stowaway, who turned out to be Jenny. Sun pleaded for her to be forgiven, and eventually, Scrabbit agreed to let her stay in their room. Later, Scrabbit asked for Sun's help with a murder case on the plane, and they found out that Dr. Bugsy was the victim. Sun and Jenny worked together to investigate, but Sun eventually asked Jenny not to assist him any further. As Sun pondered over the mysterious death of Dr. Bugsy, he found out that he was a former member of the insect gangsters. Arabella revealed that Dr. Bugsy gave her a ball-like object to pass on to Sun in case anything happened to him. Sun locked up Jenny in the detention cell and followed the ants carrying Dr. Bugsy's body to the gathering place of the ants. The ant queen, Shuhua, asked Sun to investigate the disappearance of 1,000 of her worker ants. At first, Sun refused, but Shuhua warned him that the plane was the ants' territory and that the ants were in charge of collecting food for all the insects on board. They also monitored everything that happened on the plane and reported to the Captain John. Sun reluctantly agreed to help Desho find her lost worker ants, but only after he solved the murder case of Dr. Bugsy. The ant queen, Shuhua, gave him new instructions, clearing Arabella's name as a suspect. However, Captain John interrupted Sun's search for evidence in Bugsy's room and had him escorted out. Meanwhile, Arabella hypnotized a prison guard, allowing Sun to meet with Jenny in the airplane restaurant. Arabella interrupted their conversation, asking Sun to dance, but they were interrupted by a praying mantis attempting to kidnap Arabella. Sun, Jenny, and Scrabout chased the mantis through the human passenger's cabin, causing chaos and pandemonium. Despite the distractions, they managed to capture the praying mantis. Sun and Scrabout's interrogation of the praying mantis didn't go as planned due to the language barrier, but Arabella's unexpected ability to communicate with the insect changed everything. The mantis revealed that it was hired by Dr. Bugsy to protect her from a monster, which left Sun and his companions bewildered. They quickly tried to identify the monster but were interrupted by an unidentified figure who snatched the praying mantis away from them. The mystery deepened as the dead insect was returned to them, and they heard the monster's voice. In a desperate attempt to escape, Sun and his team rushed towards the plane's door, only to discover that Scrabbit was planning to drop Jenny and Arabella from the plane. Sun finally realized that Scrabbit's greed had driven him to target Dr. Bugsy all along. Scrabbit threatened Arabella for information about the treasure, but she revealed that Dr. Bugsy's work was her only treasure. The situation turned even more perilous when the plane hit turbulence, causing them to fall out of the plane. Miraculously, Sun managed to save them all using his spider web. However, their troubles were far from over as Scrabbit attempted to steal Dr. Bugsy's ball from Jenny. Sun used his spider web to capture Scrabbit, but the ball accidentally split in two, revealing that it was empty. Arabella was convinced that the ball contained the orb formula liquid that could turn bugs into queen insects, but the truth was even more shocking. Sun began interrogating all the insects on the plane to identify Dr. Bugsy's killer. With Jenny's help, he eventually accused Mrs. Fatty, who had replaced the orb formula ball and killed Dr. Bugsy because she had consumed the formula and turned into the queen of insects. In the end, it was revealed that Mrs. Fatty had confessed to being the culprit, but it turned out that the entire situation was actually a plan orchestrated by Red. He knew that Dr. Bugsy was on the plane and had set up the trap to catch him. Everyone, including Mrs. Fatty and the other insects, were shocked when Red managed to escape their trap. However, Sun caught Red again, and Mrs. Fatty was also arrested. After Red's arrest, he told Sun that he had solved the case with Jenny's help, but Sun refused to acknowledge her contribution and claimed that he had solved the case on his own. Upon hearing this, Jenny was disappointed and left him. Meanwhile, Mrs. Fatty began to transform into a cocoon, which eventually exploded. Fortunately, Sun survived the explosion and realized that Red and Mrs. Fatty had escaped. Red had also kidnapped Shuhua's worker ants and transformed them into Mrs. Fatty. The next day, as the plane was landing in San Francisco, Sun saw that all the passengers had turned into cocoons after being attacked by Mrs. Fatty. Arabella tried to attack Red and Mrs. Fatty but was also turned into a cocoon. As Sun headed towards the plane, he finally met Jenny, who had managed to avoid being attacked by Mrs. Fatty. They both apologized to each other, and Sun realized that he needed her help to solve the case. They went to Red and Mrs. Fatty, where they saw that Arabella had also turned into a monster along with other insects. Meanwhile, Red and Mrs. Fatty ordered their troops to fly out of the plane, and Sun asked Captain John, who had not turned into a cocoon, to follow them. Soon after, Captain John entered the cockpit and urged the pilot to chase the monsters. On the other hand, Red and Mrs. Fatty were freeing prisoners in Alcatraz prison. Sun and Jenny decided to leave the plane to catch Red. Fortunately, Sun managed to climb on top of Mrs. Fatty and ask Red why he did all of this. Red explained that he felt that the world was unfair to him because he was a cockroach and didn't fit in anywhere. Soon after, Red, wanting to avoid interference with his plans, dropped Sun and Jenny from above Mrs. Fatty. But Luo, the seagull, managed to save them. Sun then ordered Luo to fly towards Red and Mrs. Fatty, and he started attacking Red, which led to a violent fight between them. As a result of the fight, Mrs. Fatty lost balance, and they both fell into the river where they were eaten by a fish. Fortunately, Jenny rode on Luo and saved Sun, and they flew to the mainland where the plane landed. They met Captain John, who thanked them for their success. During their fight, Sun managed to take Mrs. Fatty and use the antenna to call all the insect passengers who had been turned into her. Shortly after, Jenny broke the antenna, and all the insects changed back to their original form. Unexpectedly, Red managed to escape from the fish attack and swam to the mainland to attack Sunday. However, he slipped on the floor and was eaten by fish. The animation ended with another insect approaching Sun for help and solving a mystery in Egypt but suddenly dying. Then he invited his new investigating team, Jenny, Arabella, and Shuhua, to go to Egypt to solve the mystery. The animation ends with the moral lesson that teaches us about teamwork, perseverance, honesty, and respect for all living creatures, no matter how small or different they may seem.